Hello, welcome to the Spiritual Brainstorm episode 13. I just watched a video from the Cosmic Agency channel. Basically, it's an interview with Svaru, which is a Pleiadian woman from Taygeta, and basically giving information on the topic of gravity and how gravity works, and the fact that we've basically got it all wrong, that it's gravity that creates mass and planets and all this stuff, not the reverse. That is, it's not mass that creates gravity. Now, I wanted to weigh in on this topic because, again, I find that we over complexify things and we don't understand the underlying logic behind certain things. So let me just briefly explain a few things. When I had my spiritual awakening, and the revelations that I've received basically is that, well, to recap, let's just say that the true form of the source, God, or the universe is akin to a screen where, well, I'll really simplify it because it's a bit more complex than that, but just assume that it's a screen, an infinitely wide screen, so it stretches into all directions into infinity. And say that every single little pixel of reality is like one photon, which cycles between all its possible states. So let's say it cycles between all possible colors. Again, it's a bit more complex, but I think you'll get the picture. Infinitely fast. And so understand that if you freeze a frame on this screen, at a certain point in what we would call time, which actually doesn't exist. We create time via our consciousness and what we decide to see from the screen or filter out from the screen as we create time and but I'm skipping ahead. So just imagine that one photon in this grid cycles between all possible colors infinitely fast, which means if you freeze time randomly, at random, every single frame of this reality could exist. So this frame where you're watching this video from your home randomly exists in this infinitely fast flickering of the universe. And so the problem there is, how do you get to experience anything from this chaos, from this absolute chaos? And especially from the point of view of of God, let's say, or of source, which can experience this infinitely fast, there is no logic relationship between one still frame of reality or another. So that is, regardless of whether these colors or these pixels make sense from our point of view, sense or meaning, from the point of view of source, of an absolute consciousness, all of this is the same. It's just colors. And so it has to devise a strategy to experience chunks of this infinity, chunks of it at a time, in a way which makes sense. And so what this means is that gravity is simply put, a filter or a rule which emerged kind of out of this, if you just Google the term quantum Darwinism, which is a form of, which is an idea where basically the idea is whatever rules govern our universe emerged via the same evolutionary process as anything else. And so basically what I saw when I had my revelations is the following. It's almost as if here, this one of these lines represents a slice of reality. Okay? And all of these flicker, like interchange infinitely fast. But let's imagine that in this frame of reality, you have like an object, like a bowling ball. And then in the next frame of reality, it's here. In the next one, it's here. And then it's here. That doesn't make sense. It's very hard to go from one to the other. But let's imagine that now, out of sheer randomness, several frames align in such a way that it makes a coherent story, and this object sort of can start falling through time in a way that is coherent. That is, there is a kind of gradual movement. And so what happens is almost like a sinkhole, almost as if these frames were kind of bent, almost like, think of a bullet that pierces different sheets of glass and sort of forces these frames to enter into sort of a coherence. Now, this is an oversimplified explanation, of course, but what I mean by this is I really like the example of lightning to explain how our reality works. Now, quantum Darwinism. Imagine that this is any point in time that you can take. For instance, you sitting behind your computer. This is one still frame in time. And these lightning rods are different timelines that are possible from that frame. Of course, there are many more timelines possible than what I'm displaying here, but just so you get the idea. Now, one of these timelines is infinitely long. Some other ones are a dead end. And so imagine if gravity, basically, is the universe experiencing itself as, say, an atom, and it was trying to find the right rules for the interactions between atoms, which would yield to an infinitely long story as opposed to a story which has a dead end. So say that atoms were bouncing around and bumping into each other, and the universe tests one possible story. And then that story, the gravity rules are not that at all, and maybe atoms even have free will. They can do whatever the hell they want. But of course, a star doesn't appear from hydrogen atoms forming something greater than the sum of their parts. No star can emerge. And then from within that star, no other atoms can be forged, and no planets can be born, and no living cell can be born in water. And so you see, those stories will sort of not make the cut. And so gravity is, simply put, a rule that emerges out of evolutionary experimentation, basically, of plenty of different rules governing the interaction between atoms, which forms a infinitely long story or experience. That is how the universe creates rules. That is where gravity comes from. And so gravity doesn't really exist. It's just a sort of a filter mechanism for experiencing infinity. So let's imagine that infinity is this huge sphere, and you have these little chunks or bubbles in there. And in order to experience more and more of infinity, you need to have some kind of way of going from one bubble to the next. So let's say this is the bubble of physics. I'm skipping ahead here, but let's say, okay, so the rules of gravity sort of emerge via evolutionary process, and then piercing the next bubble is basically star, and here is exploration of the world of chemistry, and then piercing this bubble is the living cell, and this bubble is biology, and this point right here is the human, which we are not yet. We're not yet human, but the humans is the only way you're not going to get a circular story out of biology. And then guess what's in this bubble? Pleiadians, Arcturians, reptilians, blah, blah, blah. And what are they doing, basically? They are sending plenty of different information back into the past, so to speak, but it's not really past. It's just, it's just a way of guiding lightning or an experience or a timeline to go into the next bubble and be able to continue experiencing as themselves. The evolution of consciousness. And it's the same as, and this is very important, it's the same as if there was some amino acids and proteins swimming around in the ocean, and they were converging in a way to form a coherent whole, which is a living cell. And what happened is this medusa, this fish, and this sea turtle, I'm very good at drawing, we're sending information because they already exist. Don't forget, time does not exist, so all of this exists all at once. And they're sending signals into the past saying, you're going to be a part of me. And by the way, this is the technology that I use to manipulate biology to form this particular body, which allows me to manipulate reality in this particular way. So the fish is going to say, how awesome, I can swim in the water like this. And then the medusa is going to say, how awesome, my superpowers is to capture things in my little tentacles here and eat them. And the sea turtle will say, I have the power to resist any physical attack thanks to this awesome technology that is my shell. And so when the Pleiadians and Svaru talk to us about their technology and what gravity really is and how the world functions and whatever, it is exactly the same thing as a medusa sort of testifying or giving us a testimony of the power it has in manipulating the world of chemistry, so to speak. And so let's not be too fascinated with this model, because don't forget, it is one model amongst a wide diversity of other models. And we are the seed for all of them, because ultimately all of these biological creatures are made up of the same elements, which is the living cell, just arranged in specified order. And don't forget that the whole point of nature and the universe is diversity. Cultivating diversity is the best strategy to make sure that experience doesn't come to an end. That is all ultimately that God, source, the infinite, whatever it wants. It wants simply to experience infinitely. That's all. And so us humans, we are going to be all of them. So to give you an idea, maybe at some point in the future, we'll go to a planet where only reptilians could survive because of the characteristics of that planet. And we will make genetic experimentations between DNA of humans and reptiles, create a mutant species which are reptilians. These reptilians eventually, throughout their own ascension process, will reach 5D and maybe higher dimensions, which will give them the power to manipulate time, which will enable them to go and visit their past, which is here, and interact with the humans, which will set us on a course where we will create them eventually in the future. So understand that in infinity, everything is linked. Absolutely everything is linked, causally speaking. Meaning that, for instance, when you start a campfire from your present here, you're sending information without even knowing it to an ape somewhere in the past for giving it the intuition to pick up a burning branch and master fire, which then enables you in the future to start your fire camp. So everything is interconnected and interlinked. And so in that sense, when Svaru explains how her technology works in manipulating gravity and zero gravity, essentially what it is, all it is take that computer screen, say, and take pixels of reality, which are photons, and display a certain light, a certain color. And what you do is you create a device which is just simply gives you the permission to isolate a part on that screen via, they explain it via electromagnetic waves or whatever, and then shape whatever you see on that screen, like transform the colors or speak to the molecules, they say, speak to the atoms. But ultimately, all they're doing is isolating a piece in this screen, changing the photons in it, the colors of the photons, to display whatever they want to display. And then once they release the energy, it starts interacting with the outside again. So it's almost like ripping out a piece of reality from the influence of everything that's around it. Almost like if you have a frame on a movie and you take your pair of scissors and you cut out a little piece and you replace it with something else, and then you run the movie. It is exactly the same process. They make it sound extremely complicated, but ultimately that's what they're doing. And the reason why it's so complex is, again, because imagine if you had unlimited powers to manipulate reality right now. That means humans right now with their psychic powers, for instance, just with their psychic powers, you think of something and it's created. How long do you think that story will be? How long do you think of an experience we would have if everybody would have those kind of powers? I think our reality will fizzle out in about a couple of hours because people are so irresponsible. The level of consciousness is still so low on Earth overall that it would take a fraction of a second for an idiot to think of something deadly, something stupid that would completely destroy our reality. And so what the Pleiadians are basically doing is, again, finding a form of strategy to manipulate reality with rules, which allows for a lot of things, but doesn't break the experience and is potentially an experience that is going to yield to a long story. And so again, coming back to this idea of the medusa, the fish, the sea turtle, each of them have specific powers, you could say, in interacting and manipulating reality around them, which is magical from the point of view of chemistry, of course. So for molecules that interact in chemical reactions, biological creatures are basically magic. They can manipulate chemistry. They are a form of extremely evolved chemistry that is beyond our comprehension. And the same from the perspective of biological creatures like us. We're not 100% biological anymore because we're the sort of bridge between two realities. But nevertheless, from the perspective of biological creatures like us, whatever Pleiadians do looks like magic to us. But again, what I mean to say is that ultimately, and this is very important, it's diversity that is the most important element. So here is the first living cell. This is a very known image of the tree of life. And from it stems all of this diversity of all of these different biological creatures that manage to experience reality in a certain way, leading all the way up to humans, which is the last step, which itself becomes a template or a model or a seed for an infinite fractal or an experimentation in all kinds of different directions. And so the Pleiadians, you could think of the Pleiadians and their technology as being one branch stemming out from humans and their experience into a certain timeline. And then you have other branches here. I encourage you, for instance, to check out Bashar, the channelings of Bashar by Daryl Anka, which basically says what I'm saying is that via our consciousness, via our beliefs, we are shifting between these infinite realities that are available to us at any point in time. We're shifting through them at billions of times per second, and it all depends on our consciousness and our beliefs. And these beliefs are hard-coded, hardwired inside of us, because if you think about it, all the rules of physics, chemistry, biology live in us. So the fact that we have the universe inside of us is not just a saying. We are composed of all of these elements and something a little more, which is why we don't behave like chimps anymore, which is why we're having this debate of ideas, concepts, and we're speaking about this ascension process and all these kind of things. So what I'm trying to get to is, don't be obsessed with this one model of what gravity is, because ultimately it is just what all that's going to happen in once we reach, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8D, whatever, is that we will become so powerful that basically we can treat reality and manipulate reality just like you're manipulating paint on a canvas. It'll be as simple as that. Like, you think of materializing something, and because you understand this process of experience having to be infinite, you're not going to create just about anything, and any stupid thought that comes to your mind, you're going to materialize it. You're going to be very careful about what you think into existence. And, this Pleiadian model of how reality works and the gravity and all this stuff is basically it's training wheels. Like when you have training wheels on the side of a bike in order to learn how to ride it without falling off. I'm very bad at drawing, so you'll have to excuse me. But, you have these training wheels on the side in order not to fall. Well, the idea of Pleiadians and their technology is like those little training wheels. It is basically something that allows you to manipulate reality in a pretty much revolutionary way, but not revolutionary enough for you to fall off and break the experience and die. But ultimately, even that will be transcended, and all of these things are just sort of, how should I say, tools or external tools to allow us to do more and more things purely with our consciousness, purely with our thoughts. One other way to think about it is, if you take the metaphor of a computer, let's say that our level of understanding of reality is like if you're in your interface of Windows and you're at Windows 3.1. And that interface, or you even know, you're at the level of MS-DOS, and you're sending commands via this command line into your computer to manipulate zeros and ones to display something on your screen. Now, Pleiadians, they are running Windows 10. So It's another interface which is much more sophisticated and allows you to manipulate ones and zeros in a much more efficient way to display things on the interface that are much more complex than what is at MS-DOS. But understand that the only reality is those zeros and ones. Just like the only reality is these photons, these little pixels of reality, which can potentially display everything and anything at the same time because it's infinite. Infinity in all of its dimensions in terms of space and time, which means time flows infinitely fast, space is infinitely wide, and everything is experienced infinitely fast, which means that in order to experience anything in any logical way, you have to put yourself some limitations. Otherwise, you're just lost in infinity, completely lost. If you don't have any limitations, then you don't know where to go. For instance, you would disintegrate instantly because you don't know where you would be in the next frame, in the future. So, Windows 10 is Pleiadians, Linux, maybe the Arcturians, Mac OS would be the Reptilians, who knows? But the point is, what is the truth between Mac OS, Windows 10, and Linux? What is the truth? All of them are true. It just depends on what do you want to do. And so if you really like the Pleiadians and their ideas, then nothing stops you from adhering to that level of, to their ideas and making it a belief of yours, which then in turn will influence what chunk of infinity you will get to experience. So if you believe in the Pleiadians' theories, then you get to experience one chunk of this bubble as the Pleiadians. If you believe in the Reptilians and you want to, then you will experience part of that as the Reptilians. And again, eventually, when we reach the next bubble, which is probably this idea of the central race, it will all come together again, and we'll all move again to another higher dimension still. But that's in, I don't know, millions of years probably. So who cares? The point is, it's now up to you to choose what you want to experience in the next sort of bubble, in the future from our perspective, but simply in another state of more evolved consciousness as we ascend. And so just to give you another example of this idea of beliefs shaping the reality, because this is very profound. Imagine you have two boxers on a ring. Which one of them is going to win? Basically, it all comes down to which one believes most in the fact that they're going to win. And the way it materializes in our symbolic reality is by seeing this guy as being a little more fit, giving a little bit more punches, or having more stamina. But ultimately, it all happens in the mind, and all of the rest of reality is a projection on the outside of what is in your mind, what part of reality you decide to explore with your consciousness and your beliefs. And reality is then a sort of a consensus between clashes of several beliefs which confront each other, and there's a sort of a consensus here that is reached. So I might have to explore this a little bit more in depth because it completely revamps our entire perception of reality. But if you understand your reality to just be a symbolic interface, which is convenient for us to manipulate reality, or a sort of a feedback loop of experiencing the projection of our beliefs, which are from the inside out, then you understand that this this whole debate about finding an ultimate truth on the outside of how the universe works is kind of futile. What's more important is to find what truth do you prefer? What truth allows you to do the things that you want to do? And you'll have people that, for instance, don't believe in any of this. They don't believe in aliens. They don't believe in quantum physics. They believe in a hard material world. And their experience will likely reflect that belief, which means it'll probably fizzle out. They'll be part of the people that'll stay on what is called old Earth here somewhere. And then that will come to a dead end at some point. And that's totally fine. They are, after all, just a part of the source experiencing part of infinity. Because ultimately, all there is experience. There isn't anything good or bad in the ultimate. It is just like this piece of lightning. You wouldn't say that this lightning rod is evil for going in that direction, and this one is good for going in the other direction. It's just that this main rod is inevitably going to attract or to have a bigger influence in attracting, all of the souls, so to speak, that incarnate and live in that reality. And some souls want to experience the end of the world or something very specific that is not an infinitely long story, and that's perfectly fine, because ultimately it's this feedback loop also, since everything is interconnected, there's a feedback loop of everything. So the feedback of this experience helps this main thread, so to speak, or this main lightning rod to reach an infinitely long experience. And the same here, there's a feedback loop saying, oh, we've tried this and it doesn't work. It leads nowhere. Oh, thank you. I'll go this way. You understand? So there is no useless or better experience. Every experience, no matter if it's a dead end or not, is a feedback loop constantly. And what's happening with the Pleiadians contacting us is part of this feedback loop. It's like the Pleiadians testifying, saying, hey, we've tested this chunk of reality and it's great. Why don't you join us? Or the Medusa saying to the cell, hey, it's great swimming in the ocean being me. Why don't you join me? So I hope this video made sense to you. I hope you have a little more understanding of gravity, basically what it is. If you would sum it up in a few lines, gravity is the force that the future exerts on the past. At least in our reality, that's how it manifests. It is basically this coherence that you found in physics, at least, where a sort of a particle would fall through time in a coherent way through an infinite number of frames. It'll basically find itself in the future in a coherent manner alongside, in agreement with other particles, basically. Gravity is the representation of the orderly interaction between particles falling through time or through these infinite frames of reality. They're available to us all the time. And another saying that I like to reiterate is, in infinity, there are an infinite number of finite truths. An infinite number of finite truths in infinity. So pick yours and choose what you want to experience. I haven't chosen yet, really, because now that I understand this, it just gives me so much freedom that I'm kind of lost as to what kind of model or interface or operating system or update of reality I want to switch to. Do I want to go for Windows 10 or Mac OS? I just don't know. So if you like what Svaro is saying, keep listening to her. If you don't like what she's saying, switch to other channelers that have other models for reality, and all of them are perfectly fine. Just remember that it all depends what you want to experience.